So Loraine is a management consultant and trainer. She trained our very own Mike. So you've seen how brilliant her work is. And she's going to be talking to us today about whether it is best to direct or delegate and how to find a method for both. So over to you, Loraine, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Federica. Hello, everybody. Hi, it's just fabulous to be with you all here this afternoon in sunny London. And welcome to you wherever you've coming into this webinar from around the world. Thank you so much for your interest. I hope you'll find this topic interesting. We are looking at the subject of direct or delegate, but actually that's just the title. I'm looking at 3 or 4 different kind of communication leadership approaches. I'm assuming that, you know, out there you are teachers or teacher trainers or managers, and I hope that you will find this presentation useful regardless of your role at work. It's a topic that is many people ask me to talk about this these days. As a professional coach, I've been a qualified coach now for coming up to 20 years, and so I have a little bit of a bias towards a coaching approach, but we will look now at 3 or 4, and then we will discuss how in the modern working world, how do we connect with each other? How do we influence people to do the things that they are required to do in the workplace and also in the classroom? From the agenda here, you'll see that first of all, we will define some of the terms that we will use, and we'll then look at these leadership approaches, which I'd like to consider during this presentation. I'm going to introduce you then to a little team to kind of base our thinking around. A sidestep to have a kind of a warning around setting expectations, and then I want to work on the body of the talk around knowing me, knowing you, and how we set up dialogue together for effective influence and goal setting and so on. I have a toolkit which I'll offer to you as well. So before we go any further, I do want to say that it's, you know, this isn't a revolutionary talk, really. You know, it's, you know, what is the best way to communicate with people? It's a topic that philosophers have talked about since the ancient Greeks, right through the 20th century. It isn't new. And yet people are crying out for help in the modern world of work, where people are feeling more and more remote from human connection, from having a voice, from disengaged with feeling disengaged with the workplace, learners who are struggling to keep up with the pressures of education. You know, it's difficult. It's a difficult time, and I think it's important that we come back to thinking about the basics of human interaction, and therefore the talk is a reminder, but maybe there's some fresh points in there that you find interesting. So before we proceed, I'd like to define a couple of the terms. So the first one is communication. What is that? You'll find millions of definitions of communication. This one I've taken from Understanding Management by Robert Daft, which was the main management book for my MBA a few years ago. He said, communication is defined as the process by which information is exchanged and understood by 2 or more people, usually with the intent to motivate or influence behavior. Communication is not just sending information. It means to share, not to speak or to write. Management communication is a 2-way street that includes listening and feedback. Now, for me, this is a very, very useful way to define and to describe communication. The process part is very important to bear in mind, and the fact that it is an exchange between 2 or more people, and that it is important that that information is understood by both people, and that there is usually an intention to motivate or influence behavior. And that is a main theme that we are looking at in this webinar. Okay, so the importance of listening and the importance of feedback are brought out loud and clear in this definition. The other definition is a very simple one around leadership, and it doesn't matter to me whether you are whatever your role is, it doesn't matter. Teachers, teacher trainers, managers, department heads, customer services, doesn't matter what your role is. Leadership is innate within all of us. We all have the ability to lead if the circumstances are right. It isn't to do with position. It isn't to do with status. And the definition here is leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. And I like that. That's from Kevin Kruse, the writer of, he's a CEO in a big company, but he's also the writer of Employee Engagement 2.0. Social influence, meaning that it is something which generates a kind of relationship. It is based on mutuality, it's based on sharing, and it's about maximizing efforts from other people. I think that must resonate with everyone, regardless of what your role might be. So the leadership approaches which I wanted to pay attention to today, we will come on to in a second. But why do we even have this question? Why do we say, which is the right way? You know, how do you influence people to do what you want them to do? My father used to call that the $100 question. That's why I've given this slide this title. How do you influence someone to take on a new task, or to work harder, or to learn something new, or to improve their performance, or persevere with a challenge, take ownership of their work if they're reluctant to do so, or to share their resources, share their expertise, their energy, their time? How do we do this? You know, it is something that every manager and teacher trainer is struggling with and trying to make a difference about. So those are the sorts of things that we're thinking about. Now, how do you do that? And that's what we will talk about. I'm only going to look at these 4 particular approaches to communication or leadership. Those 2 words for me in the context of this webinar are interchangeable. So we have mentoring, delegating, directing, and coaching. So let's just think about those a little bit more. Now, directing is not terribly popular in the literature these days. It's not really the chosen way that people are advised to lead people, or in a way to communicate. The command and tell is becoming less fashionable, and so many people in positions of authority are learning or trying to learn new ways to communicate and to be effective in the workplace. Now, this doesn't mean that directing is not important. It is. It's just about knowing when the time is right to behave in a directive fashion. So when matters are urgent, when there is an emergency to deal with, and when there is no time to waste, people will look to their leaders for very clear instructions around the action that needs to be taken. I think many of us are familiar with this situation now around the world with certain emergencies that are taking place. So we look for that guidance when we need a directive approach. In times of struggle or emergency, we don't want people dithering or procrastinating about making a decision. We need a fast response. It's also an important approach when really you are dealing with someone who's broken the rules or has, there's a case of misconduct or something. Then perhaps in disciplinary meetings, people tend to be a little more directive about what is allowed and what is not. That leaves us then with the 3 other approaches, which are different and appropriate in different situations. Mentoring is a concept that many teachers and many teacher trainers are familiar with. Teachers make very good mentors when they move into teacher training and such like. It's when the mentor has more expertise in a field than the person they are mentoring. So when a learner is seeking advice from an expert, when you have novice teachers, when you're counseling students, these are situations where mentoring is very, very advisable, very well appreciated from people who really want to learn from the experts. It's also a very appropriate approach when, for example, you're very experienced in one area of work, but you take on some new responsibilities, or you take on some new challenges. Then you may want to work with a peer who is already experienced in that area, and they can act as a mentor for you. Delegating is another option, and it is lovely when somebody wants to step up to the mark, when they want to take on more responsibility, when they want to face a new challenge in their work, and they want to try something, they want to test their hand. We need to be very mindful, of course, of the difference between delegating and dumping. One has to be ready to take on delegation duties. You have to feel that you have the skill set, that the time is right, and that you will get adequate support from the manager who is giving you that responsibility. So it's very, very nice when people want to stretch, when they want to improve their skill set. And it's also wonderful when you have too much to do as a manager and you need to kind of chop up the cake and ask different people to take on different parts of that burden with you. Coaching is, of course, one I'm very familiar with, and the coaching model for communication and leadership is wonderful in situations where perhaps teachers or teacher trainers or colleagues or students have sort of lost their mojo, that they have become somewhat demotivated and they're not really sure what's wrong and how to change these problems they're facing. So coaching is wonderful. It's a wonderful technique for tapping into motivation or for identifying latent challenges or problems that may be holding people back, and also for revealing potential. This is the really, really positive side of coaching. It's wonderful to tap into the potential that lies within every single one of us. Or we're identifying values and goals, purpose or meaning. So coaching is a wonderful skill set to bring to the leadership and communication portfolio. And I think sometimes it's a challenge for people to move between mentoring and coaching, because when you're an expert, you kind of want to be an expert. I mean, all of these situations are approaches where people want to help, where they want to get things done and they make a choice on how best to do it. But it is good to be flexible and adaptive between these roles, depending on who you're dealing with and depending on the situation that you're in. And I just want to point out the distinction at the bottom there, which someone reminded me of just recently. A mentor knows the right answers. A coach knows the right questions. Coaching is an exploratory technique using many powerful questions and active listening skills, more of which we will come on to in a moment. So I'd like you to meet the team. Okay, this is the team we're going to kind of build our webinar around. Please don't feel you have to remember any of this information, all right? It's not important. But meet Mina. Mina's the enthusiastic learner. She's 25 years old, single and lively. She passed the CELTA 2 months ago and has started her first teaching job. When she left full-time education, she went into hospitality for a while, but it wasn't right for her. So she thought she might try language teaching. And it turns out she loves it. She's really keen to learn as much about teaching as possible. She'd also love to travel and see a bit of the world, and she feels that if she becomes a great teacher, she might achieve her dream. Then we have Vincent. Vincent is the new dad. Vincent is 32 years old. He's been teaching for 8 years. He got married 2 years ago and now he has a 1-year-old son called Juno. His whole world has been turned upside down since Juno was born. He is the center of Vincent's world. Vincent has always loved teaching, but right now it has to take second place in his life. So he's keen to have no stress at work. He has to get home as quickly as possible after class. He's been teaching the same courses now for 4 years, and although he's pretty bored with them, it's a comfortable routine. Vincent. Then we have Nancy. Nancy's the juggler. Nancy's 45 years old. She's a teacher trainer and she loves her work. She has 2 teenage boys and they're pretty demanding, so it's difficult juggling work and home life. She's also divorced, so she doesn't get much time to herself. When she does, she simply falls asleep. People talk about work-life balance, but she's no idea what it means or how to achieve it. Despite this, she reckons a new challenge at work would give her a new lease of life. Nancy. Maria, the last member of the team. Maria is 53 years old. She manages the business English courses in her school. Her 3 kids have all left home, and she now feels like there's a big empty hole in her life to fill. She's looking for a fresh focus, some new inspiration. She'd love to have an exciting new project to run at work. She's been a bit low-key the past few years, and now she fears her boss overlooks her when considering people to take on any new exciting work. Perhaps you can identify the Nancys and Marias, Vincents and Minas in your world, or a whole plethora of other types of characteristics and contexts and scenarios. Let's meet Victoria. Victoria's the academic director. She feels so stressed. The pressure of running the school is never ending. Students are so demanding and so are their parents, never mind the board of directors. There's always too much to do and not enough time or space to get things done. It's a constant uphill struggle. How do you get the team to keep up, to change and develop, to move the school forward, to share the burden? So, have a think about that. We've got a number of different kinds of approaches we've been thinking about. We've got Nancy and Vincent, Maria and Mina. So, should Victoria direct, delegate or mentor or coach each of these people? Well, I don't know what you're thinking. I can't read your mind. But my answer to that question is, who knows? I haven't got the foggiest idea. Your guess is as good as mine, but it's something we'd need to find out. The thing is, we have just talked a little bit about these people, and we have no idea about all of the things that are going on in their minds and in their lives. And it would be dangerous for me to sit here and think I know how best to lead or communicate with them based on so little information. So we're going to think about what do we do to bridge that gap? What I do know versus what I don't know, versus moving towards the goals and expectations we have of these people. So expectations is something I'd like to just touch on before we progress. This is the whole area that requires a separate kind of presentation on to really go into this. But one of the big things that affects communication at work is misunderstandings around expectations. The expectations that the school has of everyone involved in it, as well as manager expectations of individuals. These will cover topics like school goals, quality standards, teaching standards, teamwork, language, terminology and the meaning of that, and additional responsibilities, anything which you're kind of expected to do beyond your core duties. What are they? So, for example, if you're having an observation with a teacher and there are things you wish to discuss from what you saw and you think certain things were good and certain things were maybe in need of improvement, are you talking the same language together? Do you both understand what the teaching standards are, what the expectations of good teaching should look like in the classroom? This dialogue needs to take place, whether that's through, information sharing throughout the school. Expectations need to be clarified, and then you have the basis to move forward. As well as language, when we say people are hardworking or they're adaptive or they're creative, what do we mean by these terms? What do we mean? All of this is so fun to explore, but we need to be careful not to jump to conclusions about them. So that's something that you might want to go away and think a little bit more about. Clarification of expectations. But what I'd really like to get to now, the nuts and bolts of this particular talk, is what I call knowing me, knowing you. Aha. It is my favorite area of leadership development. And before we can get to know you, we have to think about getting to know ourselves better. We are how we are perceived. How do we come across in the workplace? What do we know about ourselves, and what do other people know about us? And we do thank Daniel Goleman with his work on emotional intelligence for this area of sort of self-awareness development. When developing as a coach, I spent many, many months, and ever since really, you don't stop working on building your emotional intelligence, understanding yourself, building your self-awareness, knowing how you come across to people, knowing what your values are and what your beliefs are in the school system. You work on empathy and how you build your understanding of other people and how you make yourself available for them to come to understand you too. What are your motivations? What matters to you? What do you care about at work and in life? And also of other people. What are their motivations? Do we really know if we do not ask them? And then how we regulate ourselves. How do we come across when we're upset or angry or frustrated or impatient? How good are we at controlling our emotions in order to create the best environment for relationship building in the workplace? And this all can come then into the fifth area of social skills, to the extent that you learn to interact with other people and help them to interact with you. This is one of my favorite areas of work, and something which I really recommend you look into further if communications and relationship building at work is something which you think is important. So that takes us then to the knowing you area. And what I like to call this is the human puzzle. And it's built on the concept of wonderful curiosity. Every single individual is completely unique, and they have so much of a story. And the more curious you are to understand people, the more they feel valued and the more they will engage with you. People want you to care about them and to be curious, not invasive, not talking about things that someone doesn't want to talk about. That's not what we're talking about here. But showing a deep interest in what matters to other people is a key driver of relationship building and emotion and motivational incentivizing. Try to refrain from judgments, assumptions, and preconceived ideas about people or putting labels on them. This is something that we find hard because it is in human nature to do this. This is what we do. We can't help ourselves. We judge people because we're trying to understand them. But even if we have certain ideas, we need to hold them back while we allow curiosity to deepen our understanding. This is an example in question. I hear a lot in my work about people saying, oh, they're so set in their comfort zone. Can't get them out of their comfort zone. They don't want to learn. They don't want to try something new. And so this idea of comfort zone has become very negative in the way we interpret it. Well, I would like to break down that perception. We cannot survive without the comfort zone. The comfort zone is vital to us. We cannot take on new stretch. We cannot experiment with things until we feel safe and comfortable with the things that we need in our lives. And you'll see from the model on the left-hand side here that when the comfort zone is too small, then people do go into a panic zone. And that panic zone prevents them from being effective in so many ways. Of course, what we want, if you see from the picture, the model on the right-hand side, is that we want the comfort zone to be large and the stretch zone then to be kind of half on top. It's not bigger than the comfort zone. So we need to remember that comfort zone is good. It's not a bad thing. And then the stretch beyond the comfort zone is absolutely desirable. And most people, they do want to. They do want to be stretched a bit, but on their terms with the things that they are personally interested in themselves. Nobody goes to work to do a bad job. Nobody goes to work to be unhappy. Everybody wants to give their best. Everybody wants to make a contribution, but they want to have some say in that. And this is something we forget, and that is an important thing to bear in mind. The other model, which I'm always using, is the iceberg illusion. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but it's a reminder, that the amount we know about an individual in the workplace, particularly between leadership and teams, is so small, such a tip of the iceberg compared to the complexity of every human being beneath the surface, where all their beliefs and values and life experiences and everything about them is in the other 99% beyond what we can see. So when we have a real deep interest in wonderful curiosity of the human puzzle, then that is the area we want to find out more about. It is there where motivation lies. It is there where any kind of interest in stretch and challenge lies. And therefore, if we were looking with Vincent and Nancy and Maria, and we would need to be able to say, okay, the information we have about them is just tiny. What else do we need in order to find the bit that motivates them to try something different? So we need to seek to understand people, bearing in mind that every single human being on this planet is unique. They may share certain things in common, but their makeup is unique to them. And be curious about that uniqueness. And also bear in mind that it is an impossible goal to try to convert people into different kinds of people. No matter how hard people try, and they keep trying, you cannot convert people into someone else unless, as the third point suggests, they want to. Change comes from within, or not at all. You may help them. You may give them an interesting rationale for something. You may offer lots of support. You may share your enthusiasm. But if in their heart, in their head, they are not interested, they will find numerous ways to resist doing anything about it. So what we need is to tap into the intrinsic motivation that lies within everybody. I can't stress how important that is. And I love this idea. I've kind of, used this quite a lot. The idea that each of us has our own lifeline, our own timeline. It doesn't matter where you lie in this continuum, from your teens to your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It doesn't matter. You have your own journey. You have your own personality and characteristics. You have your own life experiences and events which have formed you and made you the person you are. And your job is something which you may have liked and don't like anymore, like even more, want to do something else, want some challenge, maybe don't want some challenge. Who knows? You are, wherever you are on your life journey, and how you feel about your job is unique to you right now. And the same with your professional development. I do believe wholeheartedly that everybody wants to learn and be the best they can be, but they like to have control over that, and they like to be able to build on their comfort zone to do that in the way that works best for them, not for you. And therefore, when we're thinking about how we get people to improve in their job, or how to get them to develop their professional skills, or to help learners learning in the classroom, we need to think about their own uniqueness, their own lifeline, their own timeline. And don't forget the modern world. Oh my, this topic becomes more and more relevant rather than less relevant as every day goes by. The speed of technological change, the speed with which machines are taking over the roles of human beings, people feel lost in a maze of social media, complexity of communications. There's so much noise, there's so much going on, that people are feeling more and more isolated and more kind of, separate from the things which they want to talk about with people, and feeling like they are being understood and so on. And I think that now it makes this topic even more important than it ever was before. So that means it's time to talk. And more importantly, it's time to listen. It's to get into that whole area of curiosity, because if you're going to influence people, if you're going to help them grow and move towards goals, we have to start from their position. This is something I believe wholeheartedly, because we can't change people into different people, and we can't make them feel the passion for something just because we tell them to. So I strongly urge that you take your foot off the pedal. Now, I know straight away I can hear voices around the world going, oh, yes, well, that's all well and good. We haven't got time to do that. There's too much to do. There's too much pressure. For me, this is absolute urgency. It is not a choice. People desperately are feeling more and more burnt out, tired, stressed, um, isolated, struggling to keep up with things, and they need to talk. And that means that us in leadership positions, we need to listen and we need to help, and then we can work out how we can help them. But first, we have to make the time to listen. It's nothing nicer than to just have a coffee together, sit somewhere really comfortable. The MBWA here means management by walking about. Chat to people in the corridors, chat to people by the photocopier. And my favorite picture of all time is this beautiful hair. Look at those ears. Aren't they amazing? I call him Big Ears, and I urge everyone to have big ears in order to listen as much as possible to what people are trying to tell you, tapping into what you need to find out about them. So we need to find out, what do they care about? They want to know what you care about too. This is the emotional intelligence, What is it that really makes your heart beat? Okay, what do you care about in your work? What do you care about in your life? We can't be talking nowadays about the separation of work and life. These two things are interwoven. We bring our whole self to work now, and we bring our work home, and therefore we can't separate these things anymore. And the whole subject of well-being is wrapped up with how people can balance these conflicting priorities. But when you talk to people, you can find out a whole wealth of stuff that really makes their eyes light up and gets them enthusiastic. Which aspects of their work do they love and are they passionate about? What kind of challenge might they be interested in? What are they interested in learning? Are they interested in advancement or some form of future benefit that they're looking for? What kind of purpose is really important to them? What inspires them? What kind of, this is really key, yeah, what kind of contribution do they really want to make in their work? Which bit of their work is really gets them out of bed in the morning, the bit that they love, and they want to be appreciated for that contribution. They want to know that that contribution is vital, and the school appreciates that contribution. And that comes through that dialogue, not through something you post as a general message to people. People need to hear it for themselves. Everybody needs goals, but they need them smart, and they need to be able to set them. They need to be part of the decision for setting those goals. That means people want ownership and control, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. And the relationship that people want to have with each other, the relationship you want to have with them, the relationship amongst peers and with students. And how do you share your experience? These are all different things that when you talk to people, when you ask these powerful questions, you will find out what makes people tick. This is something I want to give special attention to, gets its own slide, is the sort of balancing act between support and autonomy at work. Same with students. When you are kind of keen, you've got a lot of confidence to do something, you want to be autonomous, you want to be empowered, you want to try and get on with it and succeed at it. And therefore, the type of support you want will be different compared to if actually you're not very sure about something, you're completely new to it, and you need quite a lot of support. You need to build your confidence and you want to go forward. Now, these are things, support and autonomy, that they fluctuate depending on your stage of life, depending on the task you're taking on or the challenge. And as managers, as leaders, as teacher trainers, we need to work that out with the other individual. We need to kind of not presume that they want lots of support from us, nor presume the opposite. And one of the things that sometimes happens between coaching and mentoring is that difference between when people want to be told how to do something versus when they would really love to work it out for themselves. This is where our emotional intelligence needs to help us understand which kind of communication approach is going to work most with an individual in a particular situation. And this one is a biggie. This is a biggie. People will feel disengaged when they feel they have lost control of the decisions which affect them, when they don't have a choice, when they don't have a stake in the decisions that are being made. People don't want choice and control over things they're not interested in, but when it's about their life, their work, then they want to be involved in that process. And I find nowadays, with so much going on there, we need telephone calls where the machines are just taking you through press this number, and you can't talk to anybody. Just one simple kind of indicator of a world in where the control seems to be difficult to grasp. Things are moving very fast, and therefore we're taking away people's control. This is a dangerous thing to happen, and we need to re-engage people by giving them some choice and to help them make informed decisions. Works very well with delegation, of course, as well as with coaching. And then, of course, it all comes down to goals. Everybody needs to have goals. We all need to be looking forward. We don't really spend all our time thinking about what's gone on in the past. We need to take the good things from the past, things that work, things that inspired us, great examples of things that are exciting or successful, and make them help us build the future that we are trying to create. And the best way to do goal setting is through reciprocity, rather than telling people what their goals are. I will come back to the subject of reciprocity in a moment. But just before then, it's all obvious, isn't it? We all know this is important. We all know that the talking and the discussion is, needs to happen. So why? Why are we still talking about it in 2020? Why is it not happening as much as it should? What is it that makes a conversation difficult? Well, some of the things can be linked to the obvious things that we would probably immediately think about, like the age difference between people at work or in any particular type of environment. Seniority and status. Sometimes it's very difficult to talk openly and honestly with your boss, or with someone that you think has more authority than you. Cultural differences come into play, life experiences, differences between personality. Are you outgoing and someone else is very kind of lively and extrovert? Do you feel quite shy? Other kinds of differences between you where you feel your values or maybe your interests or strengths are different, and a whole plethora of other things. And of course, what I'm going to say is you have to stop worrying about these things. You have to stop worrying about them, and you have to say, let's talk. Let's sit down and talk, and let's have a chat, And once you start talking and showing that you're simply listening and interested in someone else, these factors start to become less intrusive. In the book Truth About Employee Engagement, Patrick Lencioni talks about these factors, additional factors, which can be quite noticeable in certain cultures or in certain organizations. Might even be the case in your school, I don't know. But political correctness, the fact that you can't really kind of, talk, about people, about their kind of outside work and things that are more personal to them, that it wouldn't be appropriate to do this. But people are crying out for it. The research shows that people want you to know them as a whole person, not just as an employee. He talks about amnesia, this idea that the more experienced you become, the more you forget what it was like to be at the beginning when you needed to be listened to and understood, and you wanted people to care about you and wanted to help you feel fulfilled in your work, not just someone who does your work. The fear of being too touchy-feely, something that maybe happens a lot in my culture, where people think it's all a bit soft, but in fact it isn't. It's just talking, it's conversation. Sometimes people feel that when they change the habits, they think, oh, well, if I start talking to people now, start having this idea of talking as a conversation, people are going to think I'm insincere or I'm manipulating them for something. Well, I would still say step on through that, because when you are authentic, when you genuinely care, it will appear. It just will happen, because that is the reality of human interaction. And then there's this busyness thing. We're too busy, we've got too much to do. And I say, well, getting people engaged in their work is a number one priority. We don't want people coming to work who are disengaged. We don't want learners in the classroom who are disengaged. So what are we going to do? I think we have to make time for the priorities, and the priorities are making time to converse. So those are some of the things which kind of get in the way, and again, they require pushing aside, get into that conversation mode. Lencioni says, anonymity demotivates. No employee, regardless of how much money he makes or how much he loves the nature of the work she does, can be fulfilled without a manager who knows and cares about them as a unique individual. Hear to that. So I have this little toolbox, the conversation toolbox I call it, which perhaps you can pick up and carry around with you when you're thinking about conversation mode, when you're thinking about how do you lead and influence people. These are the things I put in this toolbox. Make yourself available, be present, stand around and chat to people, get things started, set up appointments for one-to-one meetings, whatever is required. Then put in the time and attention to concentrate on that conversation. Don't have other things distracting you. As I say, the cup of coffee or sitting somewhere comfortable is always great. Approach this conversation as a partnership, as a kind of equal rather than status oriented. Come at it as people who care about what the other person cares about. Yeah, show that care and concern about the personal as well as the work. People are not chopped in half. Empathy is vital. Going back to the emotional intelligence. Understanding, seeking deeper levels of understanding. And then the two very powerful coaching principles of active listening and powerful questions. Allow people to talk and use the right questions in order to encourage them to talk a bit more. Yeah, engage in the conversation as a listener rather than someone who hijacks a conversation and takes over. And then the idea of reciprocity, which I'd like to look at now specifically. It's Cohen and Bradford in their book that came out in 1989 called Influence Without Authority that brought this to my attention. Influence that comes through give and take, the reciprocity model. And they say treat everyone, absolutely everyone that you meet, as an ally, as a partner, not as an employee or a difficult person or a poor learner, or an ally, as a partner. Therefore, the way you move forward is because you work together to plan how you go ahead. Clarify each other's goals and priorities. What matters to you, what matters to the school, what matters to, the teacher to the learner. Clarify those goals and priorities. And then try to diagnose the world from the other person's perspective. Yeah, not yours, from theirs, without making assumptions, without using your bias, or without labeling them. Cohen and Bradford talk about currencies, and by that they mean kind of your motivation drivers, whether it be inspiration or your job or a greater purpose than what seems to be available at the moment. They talk about relationships as a key currency, or striving for personal fulfillment. Anyway, there's a number of things which we know fit into motivational factors, and it's key then through getting to understand each other what those currencies are, and then build the relationship together. Repair it if it's broken, but relationships are crucial. And then influence, and the influence goes both ways through reciprocity. I think give and take is really crucial, and I love this line by Dale Carnegie, all the way back in 1936, 15 million people having read his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he says, to influence people, first you must be influenced. Wow, I think that's really powerful. You have to stop trying to change people. You have to be influenced by them, and then you open up the opportunity to influence them in turn. So back to what we were starting out thinking about, which one's best? Mentoring, delegating, directing, coaching. Well, I hope we've understood it. We don't know. We don't know until we understand people better in the place where we are working with them. And then we are able to adapt our communication style and our leadership style in accordance with what works for each individual. So the idea is to move on from this directing model, the sort of tell and command, except in emergency situations, to one of listening and understanding, so that we're able to inspire people through conversation. Way forward. Hey, if you need something to do from tonight or tomorrow morning, meet somewhere comfortable for a coffee with the people that you really want to have this interaction with. Take your conversation toolkit with you. Work out together how to achieve and understand shared goals, and then work out what kind of way works. Do they need direction? Do they need delegating opportunities? Do they want a mentor? Do they want a coach? What kind of role do they want from you or from others around you? And just to finish, because that's it, is this idea of it's a very hot off the press publication by Kate Murphy called You're Not Listening, What You're Missing and Why It Matters, which I haven't finished reading yet, but it seems pretty profound, because it's talking about how people really feel that they want other people to listen to them. And I think she's hit the nail on the head, and she draws our attention to this Greek philosopher's famous line, which I remind you of because I'm sure we all know it. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. So I hope you've taken a few things from that you can go away and reflect on, and perhaps make some changes in the kind of influencing arena that you work in your school. Okay, thank you very much. Those are the references, and I would like to just share my contact details there with you. If you would like to continue the discourse with me in a more conversational mode, then that would be fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance and for listening to me for this last 45 minutes.
Thank you so much, Loraine, for a wonderful session.